Alrighty, we got one that's hopefully not too bad. we have visual venture. Evil human experiments that actually happened. I love his videos.
The CIA knew that it was breaking, every moral, ethical, and legal law in the books to do these experiments.
The most embarrassing aspect of the whole story was that the final results for this cruel test were not even noteworthy.
He says he's not going to go on. Please continue.
He says he doesn't want to go on.
We must continue.
Today, experiments have strict rules to protect people, but that wasn't always the case. In the past, researchers experimented on people without considering the consequences, and the damage often lasted a lifetime. In this video, we'll explore evil human experiments that actually happened, starting with the unsettling cases and ending with the most horrifying. So it is the new year, guys, and I want to encourage you guys to be the best version of yourselves that you can be. And it would mean the world if you subscribe, and I promise to do my best to make the best videos I possibly can for you. I'm visualventure and you are awesome. MK Ultra. For years, the MK Ultra experiment sounded like a made-up story. Many believed it was simply too cruel to be real. But in 1973, the truth came out. Declassified CIA files confirmed that MK Ultra actually happened, and it involved illegal human experiments.
It was the most secret program
Pokemon
ever
cards.
conducted by the CIA in the United States.
But the worst part was not how extreme the experiments were. It was that people were forced to take part in it. MK Ultra officially began in 1953. At that time, the CIA believed other countries were developing brainwashing and mind control techniques, but there was no evidence to confirm this. But the agency didn't want to fall behind, so they launched MK Ultra. The goal was clear: find ways to erase the memory and then control the mind.
Can we actually control a person's personality? Can we make them behave in certain ways, make them do something?
MK Ultra quickly grew into a massive operation. It included more than 150 separate projects. These projects took place in universities, hospitals, and even in public. And some of the methods were so inappropriate that keeping this a secret became necessary.
The CIA knew that it was breaking, every moral, ethical, and legal law in the books to do these experiments.
One of the CIA's main tools was mind-altering drugs. Researchers wanted to know whether dosing people made them easier to control.
Even people in the public were given drugs without their awareness or consent and experimented upon.
But secretly dosing people sometimes ended in disaster. Frank Olson's story is a perfect example. Olson was a scientist working with US intelligence. In 1953, he attended a meeting with colleagues. During that meeting, the CIA spiked Olson's drink with a truth serum. He had no idea. Agents stood nearby and watched how it affected him. When the substance took effect, Olson became emotionally unstable. A witness described him as disoriented. The effect lasted for days. 1 week later, Olson was staying at a hotel. He suddenly woke up in the middle of the night and ran around the room in his underwear. Then he fell from a hotel window. He didn't survive. But Olson wasn't the only victim of MK Ultra. Many MK Ultra experiments took place in hospitals and psych wards.
However, some of the most damaging experiments occurred at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada.
The patients were already vulnerable. Instead of receiving proper care, they were treated like guinea pigs. MK Ultra doctors wanted to learn how to erase memories.
And he thought that if you could bring a person back down to a blank slate, remove all the environmental inputs that have been put into them, and then you can build them back up in your image into whatever you want them to be.
The methods used were too extreme for me to describe. Many patients didn't understand what was happening. That made it nearly impossible for them to refuse. By the time patients were discharged, they were seriously affected.
He never came out the same. He had a blank look in his eye. He didn't know who we were. He didn't know we were his daughters.
MK Ultra experiments also took place in prisons. Inmates were given substances and the reactions were closely monitored. The program continued for nearly 10 years, and so many of the things they did were illegal.
They were also experimenting with aerosol LSD. Like, can we disperse it into a crowd? Can we disperse it over a city? What does it do in water supplies? And just some insane stuff.
In 1963, the CIA officially ended MK Ultra. This was the explanation recorded inside the CIA director's office.
His office reported, "The concepts involved in manipulating human behavior are found by many people, both within and outside the agency, to be distasteful and unethical.
After the program ended, the CIA director ordered most MKUltra files destroyed. The goal was to keep the experiments hidden, but that plan failed. A few years after it ended, a reporter found out about the program and blew the whistle.
In 1974, Seymour Hersh exposed the MKUltra program when he wrote about it for the New York Times.
The article caused public outrage. Soon after, Congress launched an investigation. The CIA was forced to admit the truth.
During those hearings, the CIA finally admitted that this program existed. They admitted that it was probably not the right thing to do, but they feigned innocence.
By then, most of the records were destroyed. That meant the full scope of MKUltra would never be known, and victims were left without justice. Up next is an experiment that intentionally instilled fear in people. The Landis facial expression experiment. In 1924, psychologist Carney Landis began a study on human reactions. He wanted to know if everyone makes the same face when they feel the same emotion, like fear, disgust, and so on. I mean, it was a reasonable question, but in trying to find the answer, Landis created one of the most horrifying experiments ever, and those who suffered most were his test subjects. Landis recruited young college students for the study. On paper, the plan was simple. He was going to trigger emotions like disgust and joy and capture them on camera.
So he needs to get you to feel emotions to get a picture of your face.
The first thing he did was paint thick black lines across each volunteer's face. He said the markings would help track facial expressions in photos. Next, he mounted a camera on the wall. It was positioned to capture everything. At this point, it still looked like a normal psychology study, but things were about to get dark. Landis wanted to see the face people made when they felt uncomfortable. To trigger that reaction, he showed volunteers a set of unsettling images.
Then he shows you medical photos of people with horrendous skin conditions.
The volunteers were clearly distressed, and the camera recorded every reaction. Next, Landis moved on to fear.
Then he goes behind a curtain and sets off a firecracker to capture on film the exact moment of your fright.
He didn't just use firecrackers. Landis also fired a weapon close to the volunteers. Once again, his goal was to capture the exact moment of their fright. Then the experiment escalated. Landis told the volunteers to close their eyes and stick their hands into a metal bucket. Inside, they felt something slimy. The bucket was full of live frogs, kicking and squirming. Landis recorded their expressions, but he wasn't finished. He instructed them to search the bottom of the bucket for an object.
So after searching for through all these frogs for some time, finally, the participant found their surprise.
Their hands touched a live electrical coil. An electrical shock ripped through their bodies.
So the participants were also getting shocked by that time. And that time, they were facial expressions were also recorded.
Still, Landis wasn't satisfied. He wanted stronger reactions. Landis brought out a small mouse. It was alive. Then he ordered each volunteer to end the mouse.
And if they didn't, he would do it for them in front of them while they watched.
Almost everyone asked Landis if he was joking. They quickly realized he wasn't. Landis wanted to take a photo of their faces as they carried out the act. Many volunteers refused at first, but Landis pressured them. One by one, most of them gave in. About 1/3 refused to do it themselves, but Landis didn't let them off the hook. Landis did it himself. He made them watch. The camera clicked again and again. The experiment was over. Now it was time to assess the results.
This is insane. How is this real?
Landis reviewed the photos, and he found no clear pattern. There was no typical facial expression for any emotion. Fear, disgust, and shock looked different from person to person. In fact, smiling was the most common reaction even during unpleasant experiences. When Landis published his findings, many people criticized how the volunteers were treated. The part involving the mouse caused the most outrage.
And he published
the
pictures?
The Landis facial expression experiment is remembered for its cruelty, not its science. Up next is an experiment.
Is this like online still? The Landis... what? The what? Landis. Facial experiment. Oh, there's like... people talking about it, yeah. Oh. Yeah, you can definitely find it online. I don't know. Sorry, I'm just like looking through it. That's insane. That's so fucked up.
induction experiment is remembered for its cruelty, not its science. Up next is an experiment that had lasting consequences on a child. The Little Albert experiment. Fear is a survival tool. It warns us when danger is near. But for decades, psychologists argued about where fear comes from. Are we born with it, or does the world teach us what to fear? In 1920, two researchers decided to stop debating and find out for themselves. They wanted to train someone to fear something specific, even if that thing was harmless. Before the experiment could begin, they ran into a major issue. They couldn't use adults. Adults already have memories and life experiences, so they know what's scary and what isn't. The researchers needed someone with no sense of what could be scary. Ideally, they needed a baby. The researchers eventually found a baby in the hospital where they worked. His mother was a nurse at the same hospital. The baby's real name was never recorded. In the study, he was called Albert B. Albert was only 9 months old. The researchers planned to teach him fear. To do this, they used a method called classical conditioning. Here's the concept. If you pair something harmless with something frightening, the brain may link the two. If you repeat that pairing enough times, the brain learns a new rule. This object means danger. The researchers decided to test this idea on little Albert. They began by showing him a white lab rat. Albert showed no fear. He tried to touch the rat. Next, they showed him a rabbit, a dog, and a monkey. None of the animals frightened him.
First, as you see here, the investigators demonstrated that prior to conditioning, little Albert had no fears of any animals.
At that point, the scientists needed a way to trigger fear. They struck a steel bar using a hammer. The noise startled Albert and he burst into tears. Now they knew what made him scared. The researchers showed Albert the rat again. He smiled and reached for it just like before. At that exact moment, they made the loud noise again.
In the conditioning phase of the study, which was not filmed, the investigators struck a steel bar with a hammer whenever Albert reached for a rat.
Albert heard the noise and cried. To strengthen the connection, they repeated the process. After several rounds, the scientists finally got the result they wanted. Albert didn't need to hear the noise anymore. Seeing the rat alone made him cry.
The investigators believed that the child's reaction during this trial demonstrated his newly acquired fear of white rat.
They successfully taught a baby to fear something specific, but the experiment wasn't over yet. The researchers wanted to see if Albert's fear would transfer to similar objects. So they placed a rabbit in front of Albert. It was white and furry, just like the rat. Albert cried. Next, they brought in a dog and a monkey. He cried again. It seemed Albert was scared of anything soft, white, or furry. They even showed him a Santa Claus beard, and he burst into tears. The researchers planned to remove the fear later, but they never got the chance. Albert's mother suddenly left the hospital with her child. Maybe she realized something was wrong. No one knows for sure. What we do know is this. Albert never received treatment to reverse the fear. For decades, Albert's identity remained a mystery. Researchers only knew he was born around 1919.
Oh my god, I hope he's okay.
In 2014, investigators believed they finally identified him. They concluded that he was a man named Albert Barger. They wanted to interview him, but they couldn't. Albert already passed away at the age of 87. Instead, they spoke with his family. They described Albert as gentle and calm, but there was something strange about him. Albert couldn't stand being around animals. It was so bad that family members had to keep their dogs in a separate room when he visited. If Albert Barger was really little Albert, it's possible that the fear from the experiment never faded. The little Albert experiment showed that fear can be learned through classical conditioning, but the fact that they used a baby was just wrong. This next case answered the question, how easily can you make a good person do bad things?
Fuck
the
society, fuck people.
Experiment.
That's so fucked up.
Most people believe they are good. In the early 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram decided to test that belief.
Stanley Milgram was interested in the psychology of obedience.
Milgram designed an experiment to answer one dark question. Can a good person be pressured into doing something evil simply because their leader or boss orders them to? Milgram's question was inspired by the events of World War II. After the war, many people involved in horrific crimes were put on trial. Almost all of them gave the same excuse. They were just following orders. As a psychologist, Milgram found this blind obedience deeply troubling. He wanted to know if ordinary Americans could also be pressured to hurt others.
He decided to see how subjects would react when a researcher pushed them to do things that went against their morals.
The first step was selecting volunteers for his experiment. He put out an ad offering $4 for 1 hour of their time. But Milgram turned away anyone with a violent history or criminal record. He wanted everyday people who knew right from wrong. Once the volunteers were selected, the experiment began. Milgram conducted the study at Yale University, but he lied to the volunteers about the purpose of the experiment.
Volunteers were told they were taking part in scientific research to improve memory.
Each volunteer sat at a desk with a machine in front of them. That machine delivers a shock.
A lot of things we know about psychology is because of fucked up shit like this. Yeah, dude, it's insane.
Wires connected the machine
So
to a
fucked
chair
up
in the
that
next room.
people
Each
still
volunteer
do shit
watched
like
as
that.
another man was strapped into the chair. Electrodes were attached to his body. Then a
Oh my
barrier was
God.
placed between them. From that moment on, the volunteer could not see the person in the electric chair. The instructions were straightforward. The volunteer would ask a question. The man in the chair would answer. If the answer was wrong, the volunteer pressed a switch and delivered an electric shock.
You're going to read these words out and see if he can remember them. And if he gets it wrong, you hit this button and deliver a shock.
But the shocks weren't all the same.
He was told to increase the voltage with each wrong answer.
That was the task. Press a button and shock another person for making a mistake. Milgram wanted to see how far volunteers would go before they refused.
Cloud, horse, rock, house. Answer. Wrong.
Each shock triggered a reaction from the man in the chair.
Answer. Wrong. 150 volts.
However, there was one more
Oh
thing
my
the volunteer
God.
didn't know. The man in the chair was an actor. He wasn't actually being shocked. His reactions were fake. As the experiment continued, the
Oh,
actor
that's
yelled to
good.
stop.
Experiment, that's all. Get me out of here. Get me out of here, please. I refuse to go on. Let me out.
At this point, the volunteers hesitated.
He says he's not going to go on. Please continue.
He says he doesn't want to go on.
We must continue.
But the researchers insisted they continue.
The experiment requires you continue, teacher. Please continue.
And most volunteers did. They felt they were doing something wrong,
God.
but they kept pushing the button.
So the guy keeps getting it wrong, keeps getting it wrong. Around 250 volts, he's screaming.
Some volunteers strongly protested.
I'm not going to kill that man there. I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman? I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
Eventually,
Oh
the
my
man
God,
in the
and
other
they
room
still
went
kept going?
silent.
I think something's happened to that fellow in there. I don't get no answer.
At that point, the experiment ended. Milgram published the results in 1963.
2/3 of volunteers
Holy
were prepared
shit,
to administer a
dude.
potentially fatal electric shock when encouraged to do so.
In total, 65% of volunteers went all the way
To
the maximum
450
450 volts. That meant that if the shocks were real, they would have ended the person in the chair. Milgram's experiment proved something disturbing. People don't need to be evil to do harm. Sometimes
Holy
they just have to
shit.
be told to do it.
Decent American citizens were as capable of committing acts against their conscience as the Germans had been under the Nazis.
This next case shows how you can cause permanent damage to someone
This
by
is
using
some
only
dark
words.
shit, dude.
The monster study. What could make an experiment so disturbing that people called it
What is it with the 19th century and electroshock therapy / conditioning? I don't know, dude. I don't know, bro. These people are insane. Hi, Ambi. How was
monster
round
study?
one?
The study was created by Wendell Johnson. He was a respected professor at the University of Iowa. Despite his success, he lived with a deep personal struggle. Johnson stuttered a lot. Stuttering is a speech
he
impediment
had a
that
stutter?
disrupts the normal flow of speaking. Back in the 1930s, doctors believed stuttering was caused by a biological defect. In other words, stutterers were simply born that way. But Johnson had a different theory based on his personal experience.
Apparently, he had spoken normally his whole life until the age of about 5 or 6, when a teacher told his parents that he was starting to exhibit a bit of a stutter.
That comment from his teacher was a trigger. Johnson became anxious about speaking. Over time, he actually developed a stutter.
Looking back, he concluded that it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Had he not been
There's
so
no
worried about not
way.
developing a stutter and so obsessed over his speech,
Wait.
he never...
I've heard about this before. I've heard people talk about how it's like the same thing for kids who are quote unquote shy, that like if a parent labels their kid as a specific like thing, like shy or like bad, you know, stuff like that, they'll like start to believe that they are and start acting like it. It's insane. I was like, damn, my parents said I was shy all the time. Maybe that's why.
would have become a stutterer.
Johnson wanted to prove that stuttering was caused by negative feedback, not biology. To do this, he needed kids he could study without interference. In 1939, Johnson walked into an orphanage and told the staff a lie. He said he wanted to give the children speech therapy. The staff agreed, thinking Johnson was there to help. Johnson ran the study with his graduate student, Mary Tudor. Together, they selected 22 kids. Some were stutterers, others were not. The researchers divided them into 4 groups. The first group was made up of kids who already stuttered. The goal was to help them feel calm so that their stuttering stopped, so the researchers praised them all the time. Everyone in the second group was also a stutterer. In this case, the researchers wanted them to feel anxious so their stutter would worsen, therefore they were criticized constantly. The third group was full of children who spoke normally. They were praised and encouraged to keep speaking just the way they were. Then there was the final group. These children spoke perfectly before the study, but the researchers wanted to make them start stuttering. To achieve that, they were constantly criticized. They were accused of stuttering even when their words were clear.
They were told, you must try to stop yourself immediately. Use your willpower. Do anything to keep from stuttering. Don't ever speak unless you can do it right.
After that, the researchers recorded what happened to each group. The 2 groups that received negative feedback were deeply affected. The children who already stuttered became more anxious, and just like Johnson predicted, their stuttering got worse. But what about those the researchers were trying to turn into stutterers? Well, that didn't work. The criticism did not make them suddenly start stuttering. However, it shattered their self-confidence.
Every child in this group began to struggle in school. Some of them refused to talk, even to their friends.
One was so distressed that she ran away from the orphanage. This clip sums it up well.
The children who were given negative feedback became more withdrawn, self-conscious, and frustrated, whether or not they actually had a stutter to begin with.
When Johnson shared the results with his colleagues, they were horrified. They warned him that publishing the study could destroy his career. According to reports, they were the ones who nicknamed it the monster study. Johnson never published the study. He hid the documents and hoped his actions would stay buried.
The children also weren't debriefed after the project was—
Great to meet you. Hi, I love your model. Thank you. The cute little chibi model. Interesting material we're covering. Yeah, dude, this video's insane.
Over, and there was no real follow-up on how they may have been affected by the study long term.
When Johnson passed away, he was praised as a respected professor. At that point, no one knew about the orphans, but that changed in 2001. A reporter uncovered records of the monster experiment. When the story became public, people were outraged. Some of the kids from the experiment were still alive. They were now in their 80s. Most claimed they struggled with anxiety and shame. The survivors sued the state of Iowa, which is where the study took place. In 2007, the state paid almost $1 million in compensation. There was no debate. The monster experiment should have never happened. This next experiment got so destructive it had to be stopped early. The Stanford Prison Experiment. This experiment was designed to create an atmosphere of oppression. The man behind it was psychologist Philip Zimbardo. For years, Zimbardo studied how people behave in prisons, the military, and even offices. In each place, he noticed the same pattern. People in power often treated others badly. Over time, Zimbardo formed a theory. People didn't commit cruel acts because they were born evil. They did them because the situation allowed it. Simply put, power can bring out the worst in people, but it was only a theory. To test it, he needed to create an environment where power could be abused. That idea became the Stanford Prison Experiment. Zimbardo built a makeshift prison in the basement of a college building. Cameras were installed to record everything that happened. He added cells, a prison yard, and a guard station. The goal was to make the prison feel real enough to shape behavior. Next, he selected 24 college students to take part in the 2-week experiment. Zimbardo split them up into 2 groups. One group became guards, the other became prisoners. To help the guards feel powerful, Zimbardo gave them whistles, batons, and mirrored sunglasses. The sunglasses hid the guards' eyes, making it easier to act without empathy. Zimbardo never told the guards to be cruel or misuse their power. He simply gave them authority and watched what happened. The prisoners, on the other hand, were stripped of anything personal. They wore identical clothing that erased their individuality. Their names were replaced with ID numbers,
so that they would begin to think of themselves anonymously as numbers and no longer as people with names and identities.
From the start, the imbalance was clear. On the first day, the guards were polite and careful. They still saw the prisoners as fellow students.
This is unbelievable. They took our clothes.
Hands off the door.
Soon, the mood began to shift.
On day 2, there was a very sharp change.
As fucked up as these experiments are, I found them fascinating. It's insane. It's fucking crazy.
In that prison.
The guards started raising their
God
voices.
damn.
Guards punished prisoners for minor mistakes. Their authority was settling in.
The guards then began to escalate their use of power. Some of them had prisoners clean out toilet bowls with their bare hands.
If a prisoner resisted, they were locked in a small closet. This was their version of solitary confinement. Within the first 4 days, 3 prisoners were so affected that they were released. By the 5th day, the remaining prisoners looked exhausted. When they lined up for inspection, they seemed scared.
You see how he did that, boys? Yes, sir, Mr. Crackle.
The guards acted differently too. They were now tyrannical. It seemed like they forgot that they were just students in an experiment. The situation was out of control. It was just
Holy
a matter
shit.
of time before someone got hurt.
And at that point, we said, enough, we have to end this.
The experiment was scheduled to last 14 days, but Zimbardo shut it down on the 6th day. In 1972,
Sixth
Zimbardo talked
day!
about his experiment at conferences. He also released a film showing real footage of what happened. Public reaction was intense. Some people refused to believe the results. They argued that Zimbardo unknowingly selected people who were predisposed to authoritarianism, but others believed the experiment proved Zimbardo's theory. Normal people can change when placed into powerful or powerless roles. Decades later, the Stanford prison experiment is still debated. The consequences of this next experiment affected
Holy
thousands
shit,
of
what the
people
fuck are they
and
doing out
lasted
in the
for
world, bro?
decades. Project 4.1. Project 4.1 was officially described as a medical study. Scientists wanted to understand
all
how
so
radiation affects the
unhinged.
human
I have
body, but this
no
experiment was never
words.
planned in advance. It began because of a disaster. In the early 1940s, the US set out to build the most powerful weapon ever created, a nuclear bomb. But there was only one way to know if they were on the right track. They needed to test the nukes they were making. Testing meant detonation. The military needed a remote location to blow stuff up without drawing attention. They chose the Marshall Islands in the Pacific Ocean.
The Marshall Islands is mostly made up of atolls, which are ring-shaped coral reefs with a lagoon in the middle.
But those islands weren't empty. People lived there. Nuclear testing in that region put the locals at risk. But the military moved forward anyway.
Between 1946 and 1958, the US carried out a series of nuclear tests, detonating 67 giant bombs in the Marshall Islands.
What the
tests
heck? That's a
continued
lot
for
of
years.
bombs.
The explosions grew more powerful. It was just a matter of time before something went wrong. On March 1st, 1954, the military carried out another test.
The shockwave visibly roared across the ocean and hit the camera ship miles away.
But scientists miscalculated the strength of the blast. It was more than twice as powerful as predicted. A cloud of radioactive debris shot into the sky, and it drifted toward the nearby islands.
And then there was the wind. It blew in a different direction than what the scientists expected, and carried nuclear fallout to nearby populated islands.
On the ground, locals noticed something falling from the sky. It looked like powder.
My cousin Erosi, he was on top of a tree whenever the powder fell.
Kids played in the powder. Adults touched it. Everyone breathed it in. It got on everything. Clothing, food, and even toys that the kids played with. The exposure continued for days. They had no idea that it was toxic. After the fallout, the researchers faced a choice. They could warn the locals and evacuate them, or they could treat it as a research opportunity. Behind closed doors, military leaders and scientists made their decision. Instead of evacuating the locals, they decided to use them as test subjects. They called it Project 4.1. The US knew the danger that the contamination posed, but didn't share that information with the locals. As health problems began to appear and medical teams arrived on the islands. They claimed they were there to help, and they did provide some medical care, but in reality, they were mostly collecting data.
And after testing nuclear weapons on their islands, the US studied the Marshallese people without their consent.
The experiment continued for years. Findings from Project 4.1 were published in US medical journals. The health effects were studied, documented, and shared. Eventually, the Marshallese became their own nation.
The Marshall Islands gained its independence from the United States in 1979.
By then, many locals already understood they were harmed by the testing. In the 1990s, newly declassified documents revealed more details about Project 4.1. Finally, the world realized how the victims were treated as test subjects. The project was condemned worldwide. Some even believed the radiation exposure wasn't accidental and that it was premeditated. Sadly, decades later, many Marshallese people are still living with the effects of the blast. History taught us a lesson through these experiments. When we treat people like test subjects, we lose our humanity.
What is wrong with people?
Progress.
Yeah, what is wrong with people? Holy moly. God damn.